it's that paranoia of like, I know something's wrong and am I doing it?
Yeah.
Am I being loud? Am I saying the stuff? And then they're like, no, 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 everything's fine. And she's like, okay, you're lying. Okay,
Yeah.
you're lying because I am crazy and you're not telling me I'm crazy. Just say it. Just say it.
Yeah.
You know
But
what I
don't
mean?
say it because if you do, I
But
will
then I'll
stab
also still
you.
murder you. There's no
Yeah.
way out of this. Hi, I'm Gabe,
And I'm Kat.
and we're
We're
a star.
star.
Please, I'm a star. Yeah,
You
the
know,
Ghouls Next Door
yep.
media
We
literacy show
apologize to the
to the
audio only
spiky.
people.
Yeah,
And I guess also to the visual people. That was a
yeah,
lot, but
for
you're
that
welcome
jump
at the same
scare.
time.
The jump scare. We're the media literacy show from a horror lens where we explore the real life historical and I guess still historical reasonings behind our cinematic fears. And we're closing out our Tainted Love series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize that in the series I inadvertently defend murderers twice. So
To be like that.
I just like to understand why people do things. It's like one of my favorite analytical things to do is like, why do they be like that though?
Yeah.
Like I need to know why. Because it's like Pearl as a character is a lot.
Yeah.
And you're at many moments throughout being like, I don't understand how we got here. Like everything was chill a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
How murder? What? Uh
Yeah.
so I really just I think I struggle to understand her as a character. So I was like, I need to unpack this. Why are you
Mm-hmm.
like this? And it was actually quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking about Pearl, which is the prequel to Axe, the Ty West films. And Pearl was filmed like immediately afterward. He pulled a whatever his name, what was his name? Ari Aster,
Mm,
with making a film right away. And
who needs
it is,
breaks?
yeah, do a secret show, why not? And it follows the villain from X but younger, so we get like where she came from, why she does what she does, maybe.
Mm,
um and it's important, like, what you're saying, Kat, is like the whole reason why they even like made these films is because it is interesting to know.
yeah.
I also talk about how it's not an excuse. It's just an
Yeah.
explanation.
Exactly. Like I'm not like it's totally chill that she murdered people. It's more like how did we get here and why is that interesting? Exactly. Like we're not
Yeah.
saying it's cool. Don't murder people. There's lots of
Do
people who
that.
had traumatic lives who don't go murdering people. And that's like the higher statistical outcome is that you're not going to be murdering people. It's just sometimes you get the perfect cocktail of trauma, neglect, and societal things that happen to result in murder with still that they need to be accountable for their actions. And in this movie, once you see the sequel or like this is the prequel to the original, I guess, because
Yeah.
X the Pearl, um, you're just like, yeah, she went her whole life getting away with murder.
It still does
Okay.
still be out
Yep.
there,
Yeah.
until the end. Yeah, it's so interesting. I really liked X. You can listen to our episode about it. It was something I just found really fun. It was a great homage to classic horror like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And the next one will be Maxine with Triple X in the middle. And it's going to be more of an homage to like 80s VHS
Oh,
vibes,
fun.
which
Okay.
is really fun. I really love this, you know, uh, take on these different genres and time periods and like this
Yeah.
twist into horror and also an exploration of sexuality in those time periods, which is super important because it's not something we always talk about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed this one too. It is wacky. It is weird. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I do recommend though. I think it was a fun watch.
Oh yeah, totally. It was hilarious. I don't think I
Yeah.
ever felt scared. Like it wasn't scary in a scary movie
No.
sense. It was very wacky and fun. But like it does have a lot of gore and other things that like if you are a horror fan, you will enjoy. And yeah, it was very fun. And one thing I do regret about my section is I don't talk enough about like the place of porn and
Hmm.
like sexuality in those time periods. So like honestly, we probably could cover this again.
I mean, there's brief mention of this, like it was like the beginning of pornography, right? There's like she
Yeah.
sees a French pornographic film for the first time, and it was like wild to think of. And it was very silly. It was like a silent film, which I think is, it makes so much sense that as soon as you get
Yeah.
a new technology of any kind, of course they're going to make it about sex. That's why there's like already like sex chat rooms for VR, like
Yeah.
that's already happening because of course it's
Everything.
happening.
It gotta go down and back, like loop around back to sex.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
humans.
I mean, yeah, it's a very, strong part of humanity, and our obsession or repression or just
Yeah.
criticism of sexuality and who's allowed to enjoy it and do it and
Yeah.
why changes with time and is, part of the powers that are held by those in charge. And I think it says a lot about the society that you're in and the time period that you're in
Yeah.
when you look at how sex is talked about or not
Yeah.
talked about.
And even like the silent film version of porn was like no one was satisfied in that porn. It
No,
lasted a whole
it was
2 seconds.
so weird.
It was like thrust, done.
Yeah, he was like,
And I was like,
he was like,
oh no.
Charlie Chaplin like
This
sped
porn
up.
is clearly meant for men.
Yeah. Oh
Because then
yeah.
it's just making them think that's fine.
It's also just like girl walking in the woods. Like there was
Yeah.
nothing going on there where it was like, okay, yeah, this is romance.
Oh yeah, there's no plot. They were like, there was no like, oh, I'm here for a delivery. It was like, nah, we are in the
There
woods
was even
and
the
just it's
flimsy
happening. We're just gonna get straight to
plot.
the point, you know?
Yeah. Not
Yeah.
even the
We know
flimsy
why
plot
you're
that we do,
here, you know?
No, I got stuck behind the couch.
Yeah. There's not anyone. Yeah.
It was really good. Yeah, so no, we did talk about, we're not going to talk about early 1900s pornography.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Maybe one
Sorry,
day.
y'all.
Maybe one day we will. But I definitely got in like a tangent where I was like, I need to know why Pearl's like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably would have also been interesting to do the other thing. But maybe one day, guys.
Yeah.
Stick around for our next 200 episodes and maybe we'll get there.
Well, I think that was another thing too. And then I'll hop into my section. But just like this film showed that it was more than what we saw in X. Because it just seemed like she was like a horny old lady who was upset,
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, curse you, sex children, like she was, old about it. And it's like, okay, actually, she got a lot going on. Like there is like no end to just like the stuff she has to deal with. So I appreciate that. And the fact that your section is about just like society, like the effects on women in that period is like the equivalent to what this film is for Pearl, because it's not just about the pornography of the time.
Yeah, it's about like social isolation and how that impacts growing minds and especially women in rural communities during a plague. It's fun,
Yeah. Which
there's a lot going on.
Who knows what that's like these days,
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
After reading my section, I was like, everyone should be worried about COVID-19 children.
Yeah.
100%. Like, because after I was like, oh no. That's stress. So yeah,
there's so many babies, like kids who like the first like 2 years of their life, they didn't see the bottom half of people's faces.
Yeah,
that's gonna be really hard to understand how people are feeling. That's a lot. It's a lot to unpack, and we're gonna have to
for a while. But why are you gonna do it, Gabe? Tell me your stuff.
Let me do it. So as I mentioned, We are talking about Pearl, which is from 2022, just happened. Very excited for it. And it is about, in 1918, a young woman on the brink of madness pursues stardom in a desperate attempt to escape the drudgery, isolation, and lovelessness of life on her parents' farm. It's directed by Ty West. It was written by him and Mia Goth, who plays Pearl in both films, as well as Maxine in X and Max Triple X scene. I'm gonna call that there. And wow, Mia Goth, all the awards deserved 10 times over for this role, and I'm very excited to see her in the new Cronenberg film. So
true, yeah.
Ty West's Pearl serves as a prequel to his X film's memorable villain, the older, sexually starved Pearl, who wreaks havoc on the young bodies that had the audacity to engage in relations on her property. The prequel provides us with a glimpse into Pearl's complicated past and a slight defense for her actions. It's an explanation of her actions.
Yeah.
Background to her actions, but she did what she did.
Yeah.
She's not a hero, okay? The film obviously follows Pearl in her youth now, as she fights against the life the world has forced upon her, one of idle hands and quiet mouths, and she lives on a farm with her mother and father, the latter of which has become quite ill after an encounter with the 1918's own pandemic. So he got sick, and now he needs to be cared for, which is really stressful. I was like, this is already, I'd say I was never afraid in this film, but there were parts where I was afraid for him.
Yeah.
That was 100%. Like, everybody else makes sense. But I don't know this man before. Like, I don't know, like, he is in your care. Like, and she very surprisingly, like, in her twisted way, was still taking care of him.
Yeah.
Like, she never tried to hurt him in a way that, like, she was just trying to figure things out. Like, I didn't feel like she was like, I hate you, I want you to die.
It was
about her mom.
Yeah, she wasn't like mad at him because it like wasn't his fault, first of all, but like, you know, her murderous intent was definitely not personal for him.
Yeah, for him, for sure. And even like later, some of the times it was just like, oh,
yeah,
oops. So because of this, the care of her father, the maintenance of their home, and their well-being falls on the two women, her and her mother. And despite this heavy existence of farm chores and care work, Pearl's world is lit in Technicolor, which is really fun. Because Pearl is going to be a star.
Yep.
And I appreciate Ty West's dedication to the genre and the cinematic influences of film's time period. So with X, he stuck to a Texas Chainsaw Massacre aesthetic against the backdrop of the sex industry of the 70s. And it was this antithesis to the horror genre's obsession with murdering sexually charged youths. Because that's like what Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. It's like, how dare these hot young people come onto my property and just be hot, because that's what they were.
How dare.
And with Pearl, the saturated colors carefully cover the grimy truth of Pearl's life and actions, and it inspires a twisted version of The Wizard of Oz. Only this time, Dorothy doesn't accidentally drop a house or a bucket of water on the villain. Instead, she stabs him with a pitchfork to the chest or takes an axe to their head.
Yep, classic.
It happens, you know?
Yeah. I remember that being in The Wizard of Oz. You know, that's my Wizard of Oz from my childhood. I'm kidding, it's not, but
it's not. But I mean, the book, very horrific.
Oh, fair. I did not read the book, so I don't even know.
So it's like, because I mean, well, yeah, there's sexual stuff in that too. So it's if they were true to the novel, I guess. It's more R-rated, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I thought was really fun, because it's very, like, he's trying very hard to be Technicolor. Like, the colors are saturated. Her being the star is just very reminiscent of Judy Garland. It's just very amazing.
Yeah.
So when we first meet her, she is found spinning in her room, holding a beautiful red dress to her body and fantasizing about the stage. And after being ordered to put that away and tend to her chores, Pearl, now dressed in overalls and boots, continues her performance. But this time to an audience of farm animals, because that's all she can get. Yep. Not allowed to go anywhere. Nope. So we get a taste of Pearl's sinister nature immediately when she murders one of the family's ducks for intruding on her performance. So
Yeah.
immediately.
And you know how I feel about duck murder, so I was sad.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, canceled. She's done.
Yeah, I was like, I hate her. But I was
We
like,
just met her.
all right, I'm definitely being dramatic. Just gonna keep watching.
But
Yeah.
so is she. Like, it's, you see that, and well, first of all, it's always like, you kill animals, it's like a serial killer, warning, red flag.
Yeah.
But it's like, we meet her and she's like, I'm gonna be a star, and she's dancing and she's mirroring she's in the location, and she's mirroring like an outfit, and kind of just like she has a little thing, is reminiscent of Maxine in X.
Yeah.
Absolutely the same,
It's the same actress, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, like, she's dressed the
But, like,
same, she's doing
yeah.
the little whisper, whatever.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
It is cool.
And later, Pearl gets an opportunity to head to the big city to pick up her father's medication, which is like, yes, oh my gosh, finally. And her mother warns her against the pandemic, telling her to wear a mask. And they're like these little cloth things. And at some point, I was like, okay, I get it. You're writing this during the pandemic, and there used to be a pandemic. Like, it just happened a lot.
Yeah.
They were like, hey, there's a pandemic. Hey, is that funny? I just think being in the midst of this pandemic for so many years, that when I see the pandemic, like when people try to heavy hand it, I'm like, I'm over this. Okay, I'm living this still.
Well, because we're still in the trauma of it. So it's not, we haven't reached the trauma to comedy window yet.
Yeah.
We're still in there.
So it's like even in the U season 3, they like make a mention of the pandemic, and they're like, yo, the anti-vaxxers or whatever. And all this other stuff, and I'm just like, the only one who's done that in a good way was Superstore. Just as a side note.
Yeah, I remember Superstore.
They did a good job on everything. So, but while in town, we see the world Pearl desperately wants to be a part of, because she's like a Disney princess. She wants to be part of their world. And she steals away into a theater, watching the dancers and dreaming of a day when she'll be that star. She has a fateful interaction with the theater's projectionist, who flirts with her, offering her a glimpse behind the scenes, saying that she can come back anytime. And she asserts that she's married, that she's a good girl. Because like, nope, can't. And he's like, okay. Just talking to a pretty girl, don't know what to tell you. And then she heads home, and we get to see more of that tainted repression that Pearl suffers from when she has an intimate and loud moment with a scarecrow. It's a weird scene. It's a very long scene. It's a long, weird scene, and they want you to know something's wrong with Pearl. They want you to know something's here. Something's happening. And I totally get it, because having a husband away at war, taking care of your family, isolating due to a pandemic, and living in the early 1900s, no wonder Pearl is taught with tension and troublesome thoughts. It's rough out there, okay? And as the story progresses, we see just how isolated Pearl is because of her mother. And after she gives in to those desires, coupling with the hot projectionist, she learns of a possibility, the chance at an escape. Because he is a self-proclaimed bohemian, living a life for himself, only a luxury that only a white man in 1918 could have. And he indulges her with kisses and the first pornographic film. And also he's just like, oh, that could be you. And it doesn't seem like, it's the way that it's like said in the conversation they're having doesn't feel like pervy the way that like you would expect that to be, where he's not like, oh, that could be you. It's more like, that could be you. Like, you could be sexually free. Like, you could have that opportunity. And she's like, what? No, what? Stop.
Me?
It just felt different. Like, I was expecting him to say something like that, but I was not expecting it to be like kind of in this like positive light, and I was like, that's dope, I like him. So after this interaction, Pearl's yearning for an escape and for freedom grows even stronger, only now Pearl's intruding thoughts start to leak out and take shape in the real world, and she fears something is wrong with her, and in response to the fear of being found out, she lashes out first. And that happens time and time again, where she's just like, it's that paranoia of like, I know something's wrong, and am I doing it? Am I being loud? Am I saying the stuff? And then they're like, no, everything's fine. And she's like, okay, you're lying.
Yeah.
You're lying because I am crazy, and you're not telling me I'm crazy. Just say it. Just say it.
Yeah, but don't say it, because if you do, I will
But then I'll
stab
also
you.
still murder you. There's no way out of this.
Yeah.
But it's just like them trying to play like she's stupid. And she's like, I'm not. I know I'm crazy. So what's wrong? Okay, tell me what's wrong, because you said it's fine. I loved her because it's like this blend of like innocence but also like evil. Like where it's just, you know, she seems like she could be someone you can pull the wool over because she just this little farm girl, and then she's not. She's thinking. She's more than just this like I'm fantasizing about becoming a dancer. It's just that's her only way out.
Yeah.
You know? So we watch as Pearl seeks that freedom wherever she can get it, whether it be dancing alone in her room, humping a scarecrow in the cornfield, or cavorting with the handsome projectionist. Right? And her desperate spiral is intense, leaving a path of blood and pain in her wake. And at the heart of the film, though, what truly elevates it is Mia Goth's performance. Totally worth it just for her. As weird as it gets, she's just such a powerful person to watch. Like her presence is just like
she's
shaking,
fantastic,
you know, like
fantastic actress.
Whew, man. And as Pearl performs in front of a panel of judges in hopes of becoming a professional dancer, so convinced that she's going to win that she prematurely burns bridges and her mother, anticipating her escape. And she is the very spirit of Judy Garland on this stage. And she does this whole dance. I was really worried. I was like, we haven't seen her actually dance. We only really heard her kind of like move around and like talk about how she dances. And I was like, oh my gosh, is she gonna be like really bad? She gonna be like that Family Guy episode where Lois and Peter took the drugs and they're just screaming on the guitar, but they thought they were singing this beautiful song. So is that what it's gonna be? But she was like fine, like totally middle of the road. She does some twirls. She's very much feeling it, but she, like, as unfair as the world has been, still believed that these people would value like her passion and talent over an aesthetic. But of course not, because this is how like society and Hollywood, even though it wasn't Hollywood, see people. So they wanted the all-American girl, the blonde. And she's just not that. Yeah, she's just not that. They wanted Marilyn Monroe. And so in this, so she's really feeling Judy Garland vibes in here. Only she doesn't get the role, obviously. And the news is so at odds with Pearl's interpretation of the world and her skill personally that she lets those quiet parts out loud. And she's a star. Okay? And this is the smoke of the volcano that is a warning before her final explosion. And it is really intense. This is where she's yelling that she's a star, and she just spirals out, and then she's just like sobbing hideously.
It's grief crying, like as if someone had just died in front of her. She's howling, like sobbing.
Because her dreams have died in front of her. Like she literally was so like, that's what I think it is. Like she really was like 100%. Like her friend was like, what are you like? Oh, I hope we get it. I hope I get it. And she was just like, oh, I'm gonna get it. Like, I have to, because
there's no other option.
The world owes me. And then for them to say no, it was just like, that doesn't make any sense.
It's like also like an escape from isolation. Like it's her only way to get out of where she is. So the desperation is like palpable.
Because it's like, what is the alternative? Like either she gets this and she can get out and actually have a chance, or she's here and what? She goes back to that house? Well, yeah, she does. So
sadly.
Later, in a truly harrowing, heartbreaking, and awe-inspiring scene, Pearl sits in front of her sister-in-law, the sweet Mitzi, and Mitzi explains that of course she could tell her anything. She's a safe source. They're family. Talk to me like I'm your husband, Howard, who's my brother, and I sure he will love you no matter what you have to say. And boy, was she wrong. Only because she doesn't know who Pearl really is. And when Pearl finally gets an opportunity to pour out all those inner fears, it doesn't stop. And Mia Goth gives us this one long shot of rambling fears and frustrations. And she's just letting it all out. Like unfiltered. And she's like
Honesty.
trying so hard to like get empathy and understanding while also being like, no, I get it. Like, I'm not in the right, but life has been very mean to me. So Pearl unloads on the unfairness of her life, a complaint of the life she deserved, but Mitzi got instead. Right? Just why? Why do you get that? And she confesses and reasons and worries, and her spiral is controlled and affirmative. And the world has been unfair to Pearl, and she's been dealt a bad hand after bad hand, but she's no victim. Okay? Because something is wrong with Pearl. And she knows it, yet she demands to be loved in spite of it. And she's too far gone. What we're left with is Pearl making the most of a bad situation, ready to play house for her returning husband the way she's been playing good girl her whole life.
Yeah.
It's just like her finally, she airs it all out. You know, poor
Yep.
Mitzi. Mitzi could have played it a little better. And it's just like, well, yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
can't
I
change
mean,
it now.
what's wild is like if someone just convinced or like confessed that they murdered people, you gotta up your poker face. You gotta like really, you gotta say all the right things. Like you gotta pretend you're, oh my God, that's so real. I totally, you gotta get out of there. You need to say whatever you need to say to get out of there. And she totally is just like, okay.
I'm gonna be honest
though.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't think Mitzi could have said anything. Pearl
That's
was never
fair.
gonna let her out. The same one with
Fair.
the projectionist. Like when she's like, you know, she says all that, and Mitzi's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go," and she just turns around and says, "Congratulations on getting that role, because I know you got it." And she's just like, "I didn't get the role," and she played it pretty well, like to the point where I was convinced, like maybe she didn't, and she's lying that she's saying she did because she's like demanding her to say it. But then she's like, "Oh my God, this is the chance of a lifetime." I was like, "You idiot." You're crazy, because she's like,
yeah, you're so close.
Like that turn is like the most evil that Pearl has ever been, because all the other people, it was like she just kind of like has these accidental moments in a way. Like even when she stabs the projectionist, I feel like there was like, it's not like an oopsie, but she's just like so like passion crazy.
Well, yeah, it was like a fear
it.
of rejection. Yeah. Like that was like, her other way out, and it's gone now.
Yeah.
So
and
yeah,
you're
100%.
not telling, like, it's not, you're not matching up with what you're saying. And that's frustrating. And I'm already paranoid about how people think about me. Yeah. And you're not helping that, right? With Mitzi, it was like, she was like, you embody all the things I can't have. And so like, you know, I have Mitzi, you know, I gotta kill you. And that whole thing where she like lets her run and scream, and she's just like, all right, let me just take this axe, and just walks up to her. I was like, that is the coolest thing.
Yeah, you're like, so you know, like, we're in the middle of nowhere. No one is hearing you, babe.
Like, I've been screaming every day of my life. Okay, ain't nobody heard me. They're not gonna hear you, Mitzi. And I loved it. I love that so much. And like that scene was just good. And it's also a similar scene that happens in X. Where she axes him down. So I think Pearl's an amazing villain. Like for in the horror franchise, an amazing villain. Just the way I think Max is actually like a pretty decent final girl. I think she's actually pretty cool because she's weird. Like she's got something evil going on with her too, which is really fun. That's why I'm excited to see what happens to her. But in the end, Pearl is a story of repression in an unfair, sexist world. And Pearl's life was one of hushed desire, caring for her father, enduring her mother's constant criticism, the demands to act appropriately, as a married woman should. And it's enough to make anyone snap. And this prequel gives us some much-needed context for older Pearl's murderous actions, because Pearl is seeing these young folks enjoying their bodies, being bold and free in a way that she never could be. They taunt her with their youth and opportunity, and they even defend themselves, explaining that their bodies are theirs to do with whatever they want. But that was never the case for Pearl, only having glimpsed a small breath of that sexual freedom in the French pornographic films that he had showed her. And here they are, just living her life in dreams. And I think that's what's even more important in this film, is that even though it does give us some context for Pearl's actions, it does not excuse Pearl's behavior. And because I think it's important to know that the events in the film didn't inspire her to be the killer in X, but was instead a coming of age tale with this killer twist, right?
Yeah.
Releasing something sinister that was in her all the time. Like, she admits to always kind of having something in her that led her to do these things. It's just like no one's there to hold her accountable now.
Yeah.
Because
And I mean, yeah. And she's never held accountable. Like, her husband stays with her the entire time. It's just like, my sweet, crazy wife. At least she's hot.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, you know, until the very end, she's doing it. And that's all to say, because just as Pearl fears, something is wrong with her.
Yeah.
She knows it. Everyone knows it. It's how it is.
Yeah, unfortunately. It's like an entire sad time. And for visual, I did put my glasses on because I need to read. But it's a whole time. And as you said, it does not excuse it, but I also understand, considering the time that she grew up in. I actually, like, I remember when we first watched it, you're like, this is like a nature versus nurture. And I was like, no, this is nurture. After I read all this stuff, I'm like, it is nurture. Like, this is a product of the way she was raised. Like, she chose to murder, just like Joe chose to murder. But it makes sense how, like, her cognitive brain formation like took place, and like how she never really established strong social bonds because of like the level of isolation that she experienced the entirety of her life. She really never really had a chance.
Well, I mean, we get hints that like she had to have had something before that, like her interaction with her husband and stuff, like how she met him and stuff. So she had a little bit, and she had hopes. She just kept having hopes that she was going to get out, and then they were being, you know, tarnished. I think for me, it was just her explaining that she always thought something was wrong with her, and she's always been seeking out these ways to harm things. That felt to me like a nature thing. Just because it's like serial killers, you learn about them all the time. Their parents and the worlds around them were totally normal. They were just messed up. Sometimes.
Occasionally, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm gonna go.
I'm not.
I think I'm different. And this is in no way to excuse. She is a problem. She should not have gone her whole life getting away with murder. But that's also like a product of the patriarchy, not thinking women can be murderers. I believe, I'm gonna look it up real quick, but when did women get the death or get charged with murder?
Well, you had like you know, Mary with the axe. Remember her?
No. What?
Lizzie. Oh, I meant Lizzie Borden.
Yeah.
When was that? 1892. She did.
Yeah. 1892. This film was in 1918, so not too far afterwards. So it's super fun.
She's very Lizzie Borden-ish. So
yeah. But I'm gonna get into it. Pearl's an entire time, and as I said, it's not to excuse it. She's an entire problem. She needed consequences and never at any point receives them, and that's a problem. And she does monstrous things that are very messed up. She has actively made bad choices, and she is totally needing to be held accountable for those. But I didn't know a lot about 1918, and it was really interesting to figure out like the context of this film. I was like, I am from the 2000s. I don't know. Like, I was born in 1993. I don't know what any of this is. And like, I learned about the Great Depression in history class, but like a lot of this, I just like, I knew the plague happened. I knew the war happened, but like, I don't know anything about rural life. I was raised in city adjacent most of my life. So Pearl's an entire hilarious time filled with murder, the plague, and other antics. It really highlights what it was like to be a woman in the early 1900s and how the plague of 1918, World War I, and social relationships of women living in rural communities all kind of like mesh together in this mess of this time. The film shows us a woman named Pearl whose only real friends for the majority of her life were farm animals, and Pearl's only real purpose, according to her family, is to live on this farm the rest of her life. take care of her father, and not have dreams or aspirations outside of that.
Mhm.
And what was really fun about watching and researching this episode is that Pearl's living through her own Panini Press mess of a pandemic at a pivotal point in her life. Like, she is in her adolescence. I found out how young she is, and it's going to upset you, so I'm just letting you know. Like, listeners, Gabe, I already told, but you guys who are
I'm already
listening,
upset.
you're going to be very upset when you figure out how much of a child this character is, like, literally. But what was really relatable up until the brutal murders was like the fact that she's living through this pandemic in a like time of economic disparity and like all this other like stressful stuff that's going on. But I'm basically going to unpack kind of the historical context of Pearl's lived experiences. So Pearl grew up in the early 1900s. The film is centered in the 1918s, just a few years before the Great Depression. In 1918, that is when the influenza pandemic was in full swing. And as of 2018, that was considered the most severe pandemic of recent history. That was until COVID-19 officially won as the most deadly disease in American history. But in 1918, rural communities were especially impacted by the H1N1 illness, saying that 9 in 10 people died from it if you lived in the rural communities because of the lack of exposure to previous influenza strains. So essentially, because they were isolated in being in a rural community, they had significantly less exposure to illness than people in the cities. So people in the cities didn't only died at a rate of like 1 in 8,000 or something like that. It was similar to that. I have the exact ones, but I don't have them in my brain. It was significantly less in the cities, and 9 in 10 people died from H1N1 in the rural areas. So the necessity for isolation in rural communities was quite literally life or death. The statistics were even more damning if you were over the age of 30, specifically saying from the Infection Control Today's article, in 1918 flu pandemic, mortality in urban and isolated rural areas varied. They say that analyses for isolated communities such as Labrador, Canada, and Alaska, USA, showed that the majority of adults over 30 years, the mortality for all adults over 30 years was very high, and up to 90 to 100% mortality rate. So like if you were above 30 and lived in a rural location, you were almost guaranteed to die if you got the H1N1. So like the mother's hesitation and rage around Pearl traveling into town and doing more than just getting medicine has significantly more context, as like she falls of the 30 and up category that like would die if exposed to this illness. So in Pearl choosing to like journey outside of that, in her defense, she's a child. But like she is actively putting the parents' lives in jeopardy.
This isn't like a case of like Carrie's mom, who was just a problem. This lady had like a reason.
She had a reason. She's like, didn't have a reason to be like an asshole, but she did have a reason to be like upset that her kid was like going all around town and like interacting with people and like not wanting to wear a mask when 9 in 10 people were dying of this illness. So the isolation that Pearl experiences in her youth is also a product of the time period, as well as the geographical location she grew up in. While the film was filmed in New Zealand, it is staged in Texas. And basically, Texas did not have formalized requirements for attendance for public school until 1915. So this is 1918. You were not required to go to school legally for more than 60 days at a time unless you were born and educated after 1915 in Texas. It was also like, as a fun fact, they weren't legally required to give people textbooks until 1918. Like the public school system was garbage back then, especially for girls. You were very significantly likely to not be educated, especially in the South. So with that in mind, it's reasonable to assume that Pearl did not get much socialization as a child outside of the farm and her parents. And this impacted her ability to develop connections with her peers that were of her age, as well as likely impacted her social relationships with others. Extended isolation during early adolescence is known to cause depression, anxiety, high stress, and results in 30% more likelihood of developing symptoms of PTSD. So the impact of solitude on early adolescence can also impact their like self-confidence, or like insecurities. Make a lot of sense. And it's also linked to hypervigilance of social threats and a lack of trust towards others. So like someone's saying something to you and you don't believe them. The trust impact of this is highly dependent upon the home life situation, meaning like if the parents don't suck, you're likely going to be okay. You know, like adolescents who are in positive home situations are likely to maintain resilience in isolation and also like develop some pro-social interactions because they're having like positive interactions with their parents. But in adolescents living in toxic or abusive situations, which includes emotional and like an emotional neglect on the part of her mother, will experience more mental trauma. So in comparing this to Pearl's upbringing and the coldness of her mother towards her, it's likely that Pearl fell into like the later category. And I think it is actually very likely that she was not socialized much in school and that the majority of her socialization was like if she had to go into town or if like she was at church, if they were like religious, which it did seem to suggest that that was possible. As well as like in that time period, you had to marry your children if you wanted them to have any sort of financial reward for you. And considering the fact that the mom had no means to like gain financial security because of the situation happening with her husband and the fact that women like weren't allowed to own property without their husband say so, it makes sense that she would try to marry her daughter off to a more affluent family so that she would not have to be financially responsible for her. In addition to like the situation that they're already dealing with caring for the dad. I found out there was like research that was conducted on rats, which I like hate animal research, but it's like is what it is. That's what the article that I found was talking about. And they specifically conducted research on rats who experienced social isolation and comparing like that to like human social isolation. And I found out that it was heavily impactful when there was an absence of maternal care. It combined with isolation, that had significantly more damaging effects beyond just like regular cortisol release and stress, and that social isolation deprived crucial stimuli to the maintenance of neurobiological mechanisms and development within like a growing brain. So in an article in the National Library for Medicine titled "The Effects of Social Deprivation on Adolescent Development and Mental Health," they outline that chronically isolated adolescent rats, isolated throughout their whole adolescent period, have shown abnormal behaviors such as hyperreactivity to stressful situations and increased aggression. Isolation-induced changes additionally occur for cognitive processes, such as learning and attention, and result in diminished performance on tasks that involve these processes. Particularly, isolation during adolescence results in cognitive flexibility deficits and impair reward learning, reversal learning, and attention shifting. With this research in mind, Pearl's like over-the-top reactions to conflict have a lot more context, specifically her rage over feelings of abandonment or rejection tend to make a little bit more sense. And a lot of the other stuff I read too, it was a lot of it was oriented around like the development of social relationships in adolescence and how like the impact of anxiety disorders and depression and other things that were caused by isolation impacted like this feeling of like insecurity and not being able to like feel safe or like feeling like something's wrong with you because you're not developing these connections with people that are of your age. You're not in adolescence. It's so important to have like approval from your peers. So if you're not given the opportunity to interact with peers much at all, you're not going to have that kind of like approval from them. So your establishment of right and wrong is not going to be socially influenced outside of like what your parents tell you. The context of her marriage as a pathway to escape from social isolation, as well as a pathway to higher economic status, also makes sense for the time period. Marriage was like literally the only method women had to escape toxic family situations, as well as the only method to move up financially from a class standpoint. So especially considering that like Pearl's family did not have a lot fiscally going on to offer, the fact she was able to marry into a wealthier like family is actually kind of surprising. It just doesn't make sense really, like how she would get in with the rich people, considering that like her family didn't really go places within the town, and it didn't seem like they were like well connected, and they were really rude to the rich people too. So it's like I really just don't even understand how she met Howard, outside of like they sought out a suitor for her, and were lucky.
I think they met in town. I think like when she would go in town, he was there. I think that's what she said.
Okay. I
But
don't remember, but yeah, that makes sense then.
Howard's also the kind of person, like, what he wants, he gets. So
Hmm.
if he saw her and wanted her because of what she would have stood for, which is an obedient wife,
Yeah.
then you get it.
Yeah. And when you find out how old she is, it's really upsetting. So the average age of marriage in 1918 was 20 years old for women, but in the South, it was oftentimes possible to marry younger. In fact, that was like probably more often the case. Like the age of consent was not raised to 16 until 1918.
Yeah. One
The
less mouth to
timeline
feed.
Yeah, and the timeline we're given in the film positions us in 1918 with Pearl married since her husband went to war. As World War I started in 1914, it's possible at this point in the film, Pearl had already been married for 4 years. According to a Google search, X takes place in 1979, and Pearl is roughly 16 in the movie
Mm-hmm.
Pearl. It can be inferred that her character is around 77 years old in X. So if she's 16 in the film, then it can be presumed that she married Howard at the ripe age of 12.
Oh my gosh.
Between 12 and 14 at minimum 12, maximum 14. And then he was sent to war. Her erratic behavior and lack of understanding of the permanence of her actions makes a lot more sense when understanding that she is a literal child. The frontal lobe of the human brain that controls decision making, impulse control, emotional response, and consequential thinking making are not fully formed until a human's in their early to mid 20s. Add the level of developmental trauma and neglect that Pearl has experienced in her early life, it is not shocking that she struggles to understand and unpack the impact of her actions. It is not shocking at all that she would not realize that on her knee-jerk reactions that like murder's permanent.
Mm-hmm. That it has consequences. Yeah.
She does not have the cognitive processing in place. She does not have the frontal lobe in place, even like reconcile that like
Mm-hmm.
her actions have finite and permanent reactions and like consequences. And like add in the fact that when Howard gets home, he's just, you know, that in the future, he just sticks by her. There's no consequences at all. He's just like, all right, well, marriage, we don't get divorced in 1918. And there's a reason, like, I married a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
And then went away for a bunch of years. What was I trying to expect? You know, like, I left her here to exist. And yeah, so like a lot of the stuff that I ended up reading makes me very worried about Panini Press children. And that like there is a lot of social isolation that happens, especially if you live in a rural community that's already exponentially more isolated than elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, it's not to excuse her actions at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes a lot of sense. And as much as she very much is a villain, I do feel bad for the fact that like this was the hand that she was dealt.
Mm-hmm.
She
Yeah,
was
and
really
it's
not given much opportunity for growth.
no, and there's like so there's even more than that too, right? Like she's young, she's married young, there's a pandemic, but she's also the child of immigrants, so there's the
Yeah.
pressure to perform and be the perfect American. She's not allowed to talk about like what's happening, like and to be it. Her parents are German immigrants during
Well, one.
1918, and
Yeah.
so she has that also to be stressed about, right? Is like that identity, and that stress of her parents and them having to like quiet that part of their history, and
Yeah.
perform as upright citizens, especially now, so that no one's like pointing fingers at them. So of course they're going to marry away their daughter like immediately, and also
Yeah.
the added pressure of having to take care of her father, like being a caretaker for family, and like all the things that are put onto her is really stressful. And like there needs to be, even now it's a fight to have like compassion and understanding to like the mental effect on people who have to take care of each other and take care of your family. Back then there was
Yeah.
none of that. Like her mom just expects her to do everything,
Yeah.
and like not understand that she also needs her life too. Like her life cannot be just this, and that's
Yeah.
what she's fighting for the entire time.
Yeah, and she's also like parentified in that way too. Like she's not really given the opportunity to be a kid. She's married off at 12, expected to eventually immediately become a wife. You are an adult. You don't get to
Mm-hmm.
be a kid. And she really never got to like experience childhood at all. And with that, never had to like establish strong like friendships or relationships outside of like the farm animals that live on her farm. So like it makes sense to me that she's struggling and that she is like really lonely and isolated, and that she is one thing that they really outline, especially in adolescence, is like that feeling of isolation and loneliness. There's this because of the PTSD and anxiety and depression that ends up being activated with that, is that like the desperation to get out of that situation feels like life or death for them. Like her sobbing, as you said, like it was the loss of her, like her only way out, and she is sobbing as if she has just witnessed her person be murdered in front of her. And it's like, because it was like that was her only cling to sanity, because it was a hope for a future that now like can exist. And then like in terms of like how that impacts the brain and like not remembering her actions and having all of these like really intense and like violent outbursts, it's like not shocking that she ended up this way. And it's also like you mentioned the fact that her husband went to, like in terms of like they are German, her husband volunteered to go fight in the war against Germany. They are married. There has to be some stress related there too.
Like how does he feel about her and her family? And like also her mom, like there's also this like the classism too, because like her mom has all that pride as well. Like when they come in, Howard's mom brings them the pig to like as just like to take care of them, and they're like, oh, you're so isolated, your family though, we need to take care of you. And the mother to just be like, no, we don't accept that. Like that's definitely like immigrant like thinking too, and then like the pride of that time period, like coupled with the fact that they are in the lower class, like working class, like all of that stress, like like Pearl isn't even allowed to be thankful for things when she gets them, because she isn't allowed to think that she deserves them.
So yeah, like even just thinking like the fact that Mitzi says to Pearl, she's like, hey, he could have avoided the war. Like we had the means to get him out of it, and he chose like the audacity. Like only this white man would have the ability to draft dodge financially and then choose not to
do it. Yeah.
And
then he's like coming back and he's seen like, especially the First World War, like he's seen some things, like he is so like so that kind of puts into context why he allows her to do what she does in X, and like why they got as far as they did was he's seen some stuff, like he's got his own traumas that he's working through, and then he comes home to this and it's just like okay.
And we were not in the age of therapy. No one talked about anything ever. If you were crazy, you were just crazy. No one ever, unless you were one, then you could be institutionalized. That was fairly common for adolescents in the early 1900s.
They would like electroshock you.
Electroshock therapy or lobotomize. So like, I guess
in a room with wallpaper.
In his own way. Maybe it was a kindness in that he didn't get her lobotomized. That's good. But also, as a result of this situation, she never has any consequences for her actions. And also, like, her whole thing is she was like, he was my way out. And then he said he wanted to live on the farm. Like, there's a whole other discussion about how rich people will, like, glorify poverty, romanticize poverty, and like
I'm gonna be a good American boy.
I just want to experience it for funsies, and then if I don't like it, I can go back to my mansion. It's like the entire thing. And also it's like, it's at one point, do they ever address the fact that she's murdered his sister? It's like a lot. It's a lot to unpack at the end of the day, is all I got to say about
it super
that.
is. And I think there's some people are like, wow, this is a ridiculous film. There's some just like dislike for it, and I totally get it, because it is really weird, like, and it meanders a lot too, like there's a lot of just like, what are we doing here, and we're just kind of dwelling along, but really just like watching Mia Goth makes it worth it, because like every time she's on the screen, it's just like she's so perplexing, and you really believe her as Pearl, and you do sympathize with her, even knowing what she's doing, what she's going to do, and because now what her whole life was.
Yeah.
when we get to X, like, you know, what she sees, you know, when she sees Brittany Snow's character, she just sees Mitzi. She
Yeah,
sees
that makes a lot
somebody
more
else, you
sense.
know, she sees Maxine, she sees herself. That was supposed
Yeah.
to be me.
Yeah.
Totally get
And
it.
you're
So
living the life that was stolen from me or
yeah,
whatever.
that I deserved. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a whole time. The entitlement feels appropriate for the demographic that she represents. It's okay. It is what it is. She's still a problem. She's
Yeah.
still needed to be stopped. But I did not have any of that context going into the film. Like, I knew nothing about 1918. I was just like, I know there was a pandemic before.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, it just made it really interesting as like a character analysis. I just find that really fascinating. So that's what I focused on. Maybe one
Yeah.
day we'll talk about like the sexual repression. Like, I'm pretty sure back then, like, you could not touch, like,
They had like
it was
separate
missionary,
beds.
nothing else.
They had
Like, it
separate beds.
really, you
You
only
couldn't
had
sleep in the
sex to
same bed.
procreate
Yeah.
unless like you were a loose woman.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I get it. She's never experienced an orgasm. I would also be very mad. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
I was just thinking, I saw this post and someone was like, some kid asked this person how, like, when they were born, and they were like, oh, 1989 or something. It was like, oh, the late 1900s. And he was like,
Stop. Shut
um,
up.
um, excuse you.
Yeah.
No. But
Like,
yes.
yes, but
But how
no.
dare you? How dare you, the late 1900s? What?
I mean, but it is though. Like, if you really think about it, it was not that long ago when the world was straight up bonkers. It
As
still
opposed to
is.
now, right?
Yeah, it still is. But like 90% of this movie, I'm like, oh God, I'm just really happy it's not then anymore. Even though today still sucks. There's
Yeah.
still so much ouch and awful in the world. But back then, even a lot too. It was not the good old days. It was the awful. No one should be there.
Yeah.
Bad
Well,
times.
it was, yeah. And I'm excited to see what the next installment is. I want to see Maxine in the 80s. And since it's a horror film, I wonder if she's the killer now.
Yeah,
I mean, she
that's
had to
fair.
kill to survive, and that can change you.
Yeah, and she wants to be a star too. So, there's maybe that's her old thing. It was forever. She just really wants to be. Maybe she becomes like the most star porn person, killing it in the game, and
Yeah.
then killing murdery on the side, like for reals.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea what the plot is, but I do think
Neither.
this is like a really interesting. I don't know. I think this, like, as I hope these combination of films get like a lot of recognition for like kind of like what they do for the horror genre, even though like Pearl isn't necessarily like horror, it's like horror comedy. But like, I feel like it really defines a lot of really interesting topics that, I don't know, I mean
Yeah.
something.
I
Like, this
think,
film says stuff, and that's cool. I like this the film say stuff.
yeah. And I think it does, like, Ty West's approach to like the genres and like the aesthetics and like all of that is I feel like he does what Grady Hendrix thinks he's doing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love talking crap about Grady Hendrix. How he always was just like when he made like My Best Friend's Exorcism, and he was like, this is a VHS tape. Like, he really, like, it's like with his books, it's like an homage to a horror something.
Yeah.
And like with the book cover and like the title and then like the synopsis of whatever the story is, absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
But then when he gets to writing it, you're like, you're not allowed to write women anymore. You're banned from that. I don't know why people keep letting you do this.
Yeah.
And why people are putting you on this pedestal. Like, have you read the book?
Yeah.
So I feel like Ty West does that like well, where he's actually like, okay, it has the aesthetic, like it has all the outer parts of it, right? The visuals, but it also has like this core part of it that's still a good thing. It's still a new good thing.
Yeah.
It's not just replicating the old things. It's also commentary on those things.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think like X is such a great film. And those, like, people really love Pearl and they're like, Pearl made X better. I was like, no. X was great. Okay. X is fine. And Pearl also great. So it's like they can both exist and be great in their own ways. And then also like influence each other in a really cool way too. And I was like, that's so dope. I love this. I love what's happening.
It's so cool. And it's just like, I don't know, we always live in history. Like eventually, like I'm sure people who are watching like Scream and like the other ones, the ones we watch, the like early horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking
For
about?
us? What do you mean?
Like before the ones that happened before us, but like are the defining horror movies. Like did stuff for the horror genre. Like everyone talks about them.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that X and Pearl are that in like 20 years. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
it's just like, yeah, like the ones that are like, oh wow, this really was saying stuff for the horror genre that we unpack now, like after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that Pearl and X get that recognition in like 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah, like the next generation of ghouls will cover these films in a very specific way that we're doing, but in this like look back of like,
they'll be like, remember? Look at the late 1900s. We'll be like, stop. Britney Spears is retro. That's what they said in I was watching Georgia. They said that and I was like,
it's like classic rock, and then it's like I don't even know, Breaking Benjamin or something.
Yeah. Like, no, the oldies. Like and it's like, yeah. And I'm like, when did it happen? It happened so fast. I was young, like 5 years ago.
Mouth. But it's just super gross about Pearl being that young. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, she was like, when she got married, she had to be 12 to 14, and in that film, she's 16. So like, it's different. Like I will not sympathize with adults. I will sympathize with children, and she was a child. So that's like where I'm like, it's different. As an adult, she continues to murder, and then she's an entire problem. I don't sympathize with that Pearl. I sympathize with child Pearl though, because like she was still a child.
Got a bad hand, and another bad hand, and another bad hand. She had 3 opportunities to get out of there, and they were stolen from her every single time. For why? For like no good reason. Like she didn't show the crazy until after the things were taken from her. Yeah. So that's, except I guess she did lie about having a dog. And he was like, that's weird. She just, I don't know why she had to bring him home and be weird. She was so weird.
Yeah.
But that's just like, this is the first time she's ever had a friend home, like, look at my dad, like she was, that was kind
of like she literally has never had like these interactions. She's never like, I mean, I'm sure she brought like Howard home to meet them, but like, he didn't know her. He knew this like version of her, and in her mind, this guy knew her more than Howard did, even though he'd only known her for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, she was like, come to my childhood bedroom.
Yeah, so wild.
My only escape. So I highly recommend this film and X. Let us know what you think. If you're looking forward to Max scene, and any recommendations of film like Pearl like villains, I'm down to watch them because she was crazy. I like her. That ending, I just can't. I can't. It's so good. And then the credits, like, didn't even mention that. She has that whole monologue, and then she does an amazing murder in that, like, it was cool to watch. Yeah, it's not good to murder. And then when Howard comes home, and she's just like, "Oh, you're home," and she does like that smile, and then she's like kind of twitching, trying to keep it going, and then they play the credits over her face doing that, and it's like 5 minutes of credits, and she just like keeps going, and I'm just like, so many awards you need. Which just as a sidebar, I finished The Bear, and he has, in the last episode, the character has like, I don't want to say like 15 minutes of this monologue that's one shot of him just like going through it and talking about losing his brother and just all the other stuff that he's going through. And it was a really like intense scene, and I was like, I literally just watched Pearl. Now I'm watching this. I was like, and I bet that this person is going to get all these awards, which he deserves because it's an amazing performance. Yeah. But he, of course he's going to get it, but she's not going to get anything because it's in horror and no one gives it any respect. And that drives me crazy.
Yeah, it's such a shame because she's so talented. I mean, hopefully she does get recognition if she does do acting in other genres, but you're so right, it's not fair because like the performance in this and X were like phenomenal. Like
Mm-hmm.
some of the best acting I've seen maybe ever. And like hurt me, hurt
Yeah.
my soul.
Yeah.
And like how just gut wrenching and like sad and like authentic or genuine, rather, not authentic, genuine, her
Mm-hmm.
emotional responses are and how well she acts them. She needs all the awards. And you're so right. It's such a shame because she's probably not going to get them.
Mm-hmm. Just like how Tony Collette was robbed from
Yeah.
Hereditary. And it's like, and she's, secured herself in this horror genre too, because like the Cronenberg film is pretty horrific as well. And so it's like, are you going to keep doing this? Because they're not going to give you the respect that you need. Like, or I just hope maybe you'll bring the respect, right? Like people start looking at, although I don't know, why wouldn't you look at Tony Collette? Like if someone was going to change the game, it would probably have been her. But
Yeah. And like thinking of like Jordan Peele's films that like won some awards, I think, but like don't get the recognition in terms of awards that they need to
or
as
to
well.
get marked as comedies instead of horror.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like it's an entire thing.
There's a lot of problems.
The horror genre gets no respect, and yeah,
and it's like you really like you got to.
And it's doing the most. It's saying the most. It should be getting the most awards of all things.
You gotta traumatize yourself in horror films, like as an act, like
yeah.
what? Anyway, that's our tangent for that. But be sure to like and subscribe. And we're gonna be off for the month of March, so catch us back in April. And in the meantime, definitely let us know what you think. Suggestions for things. We have a new series coming in April, and we're excited to see you then. And we'll miss you. And don't get married.
Delete your kids.
Yeah.
Or you'll murder your family and then greet that husband or whoever you married and just be like for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. Wild.